G'day and welcome to Does It Matter Again. Look, I've heard a lot of talk lately about getting back to normal. I've also heard the term the new normal. I understand the first one and the need and desire for it, and I think we heavily underestimate what the new normal is going to look like. I don't think anyone exactly knows, but it seems to me that to get back to normal, we would need to return to the way the economy was before COVID. And COVID's not even close to being over. The new epicenters are opening up in other parts of Asia, Africa, and South America. It is barely flattened out, and it hasn't flattened out much of Europe. It's still raging. North America is the same. We're many, many months, possibly a couple of years away from being able to fly to most of these countries and have them fly to us safely. It could easily be a couple of years. So the normal that we were used to, with the same levels of migration and tourism and so on, they're a very long way away. Our economy, in its normal state, the old normal, relied on 240 to 300,000 people per year coming across for the purposes of migration. This expanded our economy hugely. It created loads of jobs. I know a lot of people were worried about it, and there were certainly areas where it created job stress because lots of people poured into those particular areas. But overall, it created more jobs than it replaced. That doesn't mean it didn't create problems in certain sectors. That's a different kettle of fish entirely, because you can't choose where people go to work and where they tend to train and so on and so on. Though there are some predictive algorithms that are getting good at predicting based on demography, gender and so on. You can predict fairly accurately where people are going to choose to go. But governments so far, certainly the Australian government's not particularly good at using those yet. We also had, as many as 450,000 457 and special visas, special work visas. We had hundreds of thousands of foreign students, many of them on student and working visas as well. So we had huge amounts of external input stimulus into the economy. We had an enormous education sector with tens of billions of dollars. I think it was $60 billion a year. Pardon me. We had all the stimulation going to the economy, and you're talking about, it put our GDP on steroids. Now that's gone, and it's not coming back, possibly ever. It certainly won't come back anytime soon to the degree that we were used to it. So the normal that we were used to, that would give us the same level of fairly high unemployment, underemployment we already had, and we were getting worse. The world was edging towards a recession anyway, which I've said in previous videos. That normal level of unemployment, which was, realistically speaking, was close to 10% anyway. We were keeping it down under 6%, but only by fudging the figures and counting people who work 1 to 5 hours as employed, which is it's ludicrous. Even people who work 10 hours aren't really employed. Not really, not realistically, not when they're taking most of a social security payment. So, or at least half of it. We were probably closer to 10%. Now we've got to be hovering above 20, realistically speaking. They're saying they're only admitting to 10 or 11, but it's going to be well above 10, 20%. I'd say more like 30 or 40 if you count all the people on JobKeeper, many of whom are not working. So we already had some issues with employment and underemployment, and they were growing problems. They were emerging and deepening problems. Now we have lost some of the biggest economy expanders that are possible to have. they're gone. And they're not coming back anytime soon. And when they do come back, they'll come back slowly, progressively. They will come back in such a manner that it will take quite a while for us to feel the effects. So the new normal that people are talking about is an economy that is much smaller, and expands much more slowly, grows more slowly than it ever did before. Now, there will be areas like exporting and mines and food exports that will still continue to boom because the population's growing worldwide, so they're going to continue to grow as well. But they still won't grow as fast, particularly mining. Our ores and so on will still go out there, but they won't go out at the same level of pace because everyone else is going to be suffering the same level of growth. If governments are smart, they'll increase the infrastructural expenditure. They'll create as many PPPs, which are private-public partnerships, as they can, and try and bolster the economy that way, and also create valuable new modern infrastructure. It's always a good thing if it's done properly. But that will only do so much. The reality is we're not going to get anything like the growth that we were used to. And one of the biggest drivers of employment was those 240 to 300,000 people coming in, all those students coming in. It's why we had to import quite a few foreign workers to fill the gaps in the economy. Now we're going to have to fill those gaps ourselves, which will create some employment, but we have a very weak labour market. And what I mean by that is that the labour market is very poorly paid. We have not seen significant wage growth. We have seen below CPI wage growth for 18 years. 18. Through the longest boom in Australia's history, we have seen the lowest wage growth. That's not an accident. It's positively evil if it was done on purpose, but it is a gross systemic failure to pass on the enormous profits of this time to the people who actually did most of the work and earned it. They did not get that. What they got was cheap credit, easy mortgages, and more debt. They did not get direct income from the wealth of the nation, even though they actively contributed to it in a variety of ways, both as producers and consumers. But that's for a whole other video. The reality is that growth has completely slowed down. The estimates are that next year we'll take in zero migration, and the year after will be very slow. It's going to be slow for a few years. We're very, very careful about the migration. And most of the migration that we're taking in for countries that are highly at risk, countries that will no doubt struggle with COVID for quite some time to come. We're going to have to vet and quarantine people. It's going to become a much more expensive process for everyone concerned, including the Australian government. And as a result, it will slow down the numbers of people that we can actually logistically process, and what's profitable will become less so in both the education sector and other areas that benefit from it. So this will drive automation, rationalisation through the workforce, which is never good for us workers, and automation and things like that will just diminish the pool of jobs that's already shrunk dramatically and will continue to shrink dramatically. So when I listen to governments talk about getting things back to normal, I despair. They're not telling people the truth. The entire world economy has ground to a halt. It will start up. It's already started to start up again. It will not this year or next year, and probably the year after, get back to anything remotely approaching normal. The most optimistic projections that I've read from Deloitte suggest that we will not get even close. And what they're talking about close, they're talking about 75% of the pre-COVID growth, pre-COVID economic reality by the end, fourth quarter 21. That's the end of next year. Which means we won't reach actual comparity with where we were in 2019 till 22 or later. And this is multiple hardcore economic and commerce-based commentators crunching the numbers and going, holy cow, this is where we're at. So when you hear people talk about getting back to normal, please do not buy the propaganda that somehow things will be normal later this year or next year. They won't. Even if they look normal, even if we can, in Australia, escape COVID and eradicate it, which is entirely possible if we're rigorous enough, we're not going to be able to expand our economy the way we did. There's all the measures that were there, even our export markets are going to suffer. Possibly food. So that has a direct relationship to job markets. It has a direct relationship to earning capacities, incomes. It has a direct relationship with profits and dividends for shareholders. It's still tied in, and every country in the world is going to be copying it to some degree. Okay, some more than others. So the new normal is a slower, at least in some areas, slower, more gradual, and less lower employment status. So yes, interest rates will stay low. Inflation is likely to remain fairly low too, and so will wage growth, and so will employment. This is the reality. We're moving into a much lower growth economy for a reasonably lengthy period of time, 1 to 3 years. This is what we need to be told. This is what we need to hear. But we are currently have an ideological government in place, the Liberal government, who are so scared of modern monetary theory, even though it's proved its worth over and over again since the GFC in terms of stimulating the economy and preventing collapses and mitigating the ones that had to happen, preventing us having a depression where you've got millions on the street and starving. That's an entirely real proposition for us, and it's been mitigated by the kind of modern monetary theory spending that we're seeing, and it's going to be required for a long time to come. It's going to require some big reforms in the way that we, not just the way that we practice, but the way we look at the economy and what kind of creature we think it is, because it isn't what we thought it was. It's emerging, it's evolving, it's dynamic. Civilization changes, people change, and so do the systems that we create. And we need to modernize it and update it, and that's one of the things that we are going to have to do over the next few years. I can't see how in the next few years we get all the people who've lost work back into full-time work. I don't see the growth in the economy to do that. I don't. Unless the government wants to employ millions of people in make-work situations, or some of them obviously not make-work, but in make-work situations, I can't see how we employ everyone out there who's going to need work. We're going to have very high unemployment, and it's going to be very indeterminate. And then the fluctuations that naturally exist in the economy are still going to be there this year and next year and the year after. They're still going to be there. So we're going to have to put up with the natural variations in the economy, the dips, seasonal adjustments and so on. But we're going to have to do it with far less input, far less total input. And that means less for everyone, at least in terms of employment and access to credit. And that's another big one. Businesses will have restricted access to credit. There's already evidence that banks are beginning to shift their exposure away from assets, which is housing as such, and into other areas. And they're going to consolidate that over the next few years, you can guarantee it. Where they go, I don't know. Perhaps certain types of shares, sovereign bonds. If MMT becomes more popular amongst governments, and I think it will, then the bond market will probably grow and banks will be a big contributor to that. China certainly has been. There'll be other areas of growth too, but the reality is that we are not going to see anything like what we were used to. And for governments to tell people we're just going to get back to normal, I don't see how we employ 4 to 5 billion adults over the next 10 years. COVID has put steroids into an already existing process of the cat's playing up, of underemployment and employment. It's already done it, and it's going to continue to ramp that up and drive the rationalisation of the workforce, drive automation and the use of software and AI. There's so many billions going into that at the moment. It's scary, and that does not bode well for most workforces. It does not. And the kind of jobs that it creates are far more difficult to get, far more specialized, and there are far less of them than previous. I've done a video on this before. When we invented PCs, you can put a person behind every PC. When we invented the assembly line, a person could be at each station on the assembly line. And yes, it was a lot faster, so you just made more assembly lines. We were able to ramp up growth and production that way. The assembly lines of the future don't need people at all. The Nissan has a plant that produces all its cars. It used to employ 4,000 to 6,000 people. Now they employ 30 techs. That's it. Nike produce their shoes in Germany and soon in America. Again, 60 odd staff. That's it. Where they used to employ thousands. That's the future. There's nothing that can change that either. It's inevitable, and it's a good thing in the long run. But in the short run, it's very disruptive. So when you hear about the normal, prepare for a new normal, and also keep that in mind when you go to vote, when you talk to your MPs, when you're engaged in any kind of social activity, talking with friends. Keep in mind that new normal is going to require some leadership that understand that as well, because at the moment we don't have leadership that I can see very clearly they're being dragged kicking and screaming to the most basic measures they need to take, let alone more advanced measures that could bring us out of this way ahead of where we are now, and better off because of it. We're going to need some more progressive, forward-thinking, visionary people. Okay, that's probably not crazy. It's a crazy symbol, but yeah, forward-thinking and progressive and visionary. And I don't see that at the moment. I see reluctance and a grudging acceptance of pragmatic realities. I don't see much forward-thinking at all, and I see a lot of wishful thinking. And a desire to return to the 1950s, not even the noughties, but the 1950s in some respects. So yeah, we need to grow up and realize that the world has changed. It's going to keep changing ever more rapidly, and what we considered normal is gone, and it's not coming back. It's not. These are life-changing things. These things happen once or twice a century, and they change everything. And we should expect more of these to occur than has ever occurred before. The last 50 years have seen a stunning number of what's Stephen Gould used to call punctuated equilibrium, climactic disruptive events. We've seen more of them in the last 50 years than the previous 300 or 400. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. And so we should be prepared for disruption. We should be prepared for rapid change on a much more regular basis than we've seen in previous eras. And we should be harsh in our judgment of leadership that does not accept this. Political leaders need to be tossed out if they don't accept this, if they don't understand what's in front of them and listen to the best minds on the planet telling them so. Tough times are coming, but also a lot of opportunity, stunning levels of opportunity for people who are willing to seize the day, and big changes that I think will eventually bring in job guarantees, a UBI, so that no one falls through the cracks, better healthcare, better education systems that are much better funded so that people can afford to re-educate over and over again through their life, so that people can afford to sustain their health, which is again good for the economy as well as their personal lives and community in general. These are the things we need to work on. These are the things we need to maintain. Education, some level of work for everyone, even if it means we're only working part-time, and a UBI to subsidise that, to enable us to be contributors, not just on an economic level, but on a social, educational, and cultural level as well. There are many forms of contribution, and we need to discover other ways of contributing and being paid for, or at least being reimbursed for them in one way or the other. For example, if you do lots of community work, the government pays your rent, or it gives you more money or subsidies. If you run community classes in your community gym or business, You run some free classes for people, and the government can subsidise that too. And there's ways to keep the economy moving when it has so much less inputs. And over time, they'll become permanent features of our economy. And they'll put a ground floor into the economy so that people stop falling through the cracks into homelessness and desperation and crime. Okay, guys. Cheers. Something happened there. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay, guys. Cheers. Have a little think. I'm going to do another video in much more detail looking at these trends and so on, but I thought this would be a good introductory video of sort of where I'm thinking, what I'm thinking about at the moment, and where I think we're moving to. And the things that, next one will talk about more about the things that we can prepare, things that we can look at, areas we can look at for employment, and what we can do to improve our positions in this new and uncertain era. Cheers, guys.